Hey everybody, it's Chris and Rick Talk Guitars. Today we want to talk about kind of the mythology about some pieces of gear. I mean, there's mythology about most pieces of gear when we talk about this stuff, but particularly kind of stuff like the KLON pedal and the Dumble amp, to name a couple. But Chris and I will just kind of talk about kind of our perception of these kind of mythological pieces of gear and kind of the psychology and also some facts about some of this stuff. Chris is the guy that goes down the rabbit hole. I follow as a tag along and throw spitwads at him behind his head. But Chris, why don't you start off? Let's talk about the KLON and what does the KLON mean to you?
The KLON, I first became familiar with it in the 90s when I was working at a guitar shop, and I'm one of the guitar players down there. He was way into it. Honestly, I didn't really pay that much attention to it other than say, oh, it's an interesting looking pedal. That was when I was first introduced to it. And then over years, dicking around on the web, it's come up a bunch of times, but you know what? I never really gave it that much thought. And then recently I happened to see like what the pedal's going for. That piqued my interest because I'm a fan of, I'm not really a huge pedal guy. I have like two pedals that I pretty much use all the time. But I have a board that's got maybe about 6 of them that I'll use sometimes. But I love pedals. And the thing I love about pedals is I love pedal lore. I love pedal drama. I love all this pedal related stuff. And the KLON comes with a whole shitload of baggage of drama and mythology and internet fighting and everything else.
Yeah.
So it's a fascinating pedal. That was a winded way of saying I was familiar with it, became familiar with it in the 90s, and have never heard it, but I'm fascinated by it. How about you?
Yeah, I think a similar journey for me. It came on my radar way back when, and I didn't pay much attention either. But I do know I have heard them live. A buddy of ours is a big KLON fan, and it's part of his setup. And I've seen him live a couple times, and he does get great tone when he's got that pedal on. And then when you and I were talking about this, I went online and looked at some shootouts between the KLON and other pedals. And I gotta say, I mean, it does sound good. And again, for those who don't know, maybe, and those who do know, the inspiration for this pedal was the guy wanted to build a pedal that sounded like an overdriven amp, essentially. Is that right? Yeah.
And retained all the characteristics of your amp.
Yeah, the harmonic goodness and all that other stuff of an amp, and replicate that as much as possible. And I think, it's a pretty cool pedal for that, I guess. But as you and I are talking about, these things became legendary, and there's all kinds of lore about them. And now, like the early original ones, the price tags are just insane for these things. I mean, comparable to buying like a black panel Fender amp.
Or a couple of them. I just saw one on Reverb that with a low serial number that went for almost 10 grand.
Jesus. Yeah. But hey, I mean, if that's your jam and you got the dough, rock it. But
let's talk about that, because that's like a lot of people's, and it's kind of a natural reaction, I think, to anybody. The reaction when they hear something like that, they go, why would I spend that much on a pedal when I could get like 2 amps that sound good already instead of using a pedal to make my amp sound good or whatever? And that's a valid knee-jerk reaction. But the thing of it is part of the reason behind its legendary status is there's only so many of them. So, someone that says, why would you do that when you can't, I'll get you can get a Tweed Super and a Tweed, Harvard, or just a couple of classic, like great amps for that, but you're not going to get a KLON. That's it. And that's what I think a lot of people's thinking is like, it became its own thing. It's up there with like, the Tweed Basement and stuff like that. It's a legendary piece of gear. So I can definitely see someone's thinking like, yeah, I don't care. I mean, I can get these 2 amps, or I can get a guitar, I can get this other stuff, but I want this thing. I want what it is.
Yeah.
So I think that's it. But for a lot of us, we're like, no, I see where I could put my money to have much more musical fun than that. But it is. I mean, it's mind blowing. And I'm just looking at the sold listings on Reverb, and the ones that go for the most money have super low serial numbers. There are a bunch of fakes on there now. If you look, you'll see a bunch of them claiming to be from the 90s that look exactly the same, and they're like $1,600 or something. That's not a real one.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, and how did it get to be this type of pedal. I mean, there's a lot of hype behind it, and there's a lot of like the design. Let's talk about the design for a second.
Yeah.
This is something I'm really fascinated about. I think it's a beautiful design. The pedal, when you think about the pedal landscape when it came out, there was nothing that looked like it. It's big. It's, it's a cool color, that like the choice of knobs, like the LED position, everything about it is, I think, to me, I find a really great design. I mean, I think it stands out. It's great. It's solid. The inside, the way it's laid out, is really clean. I like that the early run of this pedal, we were still using the good switches and, switchcraft jacks and the Carling switches. Everything is really solid and, kind of point to point wired. That was like the last era of when you had that good shit. And then the whole boutique industry swept in and went to that stupid switch, and true bypass became a thing. So that dude who made the KLON, it's not a true bypass. It's got a kind of a unique buffer in it. So it's a buffered pedal, and I like that about it. And it's something interesting on the true bypass thing, which we can get into a little bit later, is the designer made a new pedal. I don't know how long ago, but it was supposed to be an affordable version. It's called the KTR. And he has the option of a switch between true bypass and buffered bypass. But his own thinking, which kind of parallels me, is you want buffered bypassing. The whole true bypassing thing is bullshit. You know what I mean?
I agree.
So, and he said one of the reasons he put it in there is so people can A/B it. The problem with true bypass pedals is if you get a number of them together and, look at people's pedal board, it's all true bypass. You're losing all this high end and body and everything else. So he put the switch on there partly to satisfy the market, which still demands true bypass, which is super annoying. And he also said it's a great way to test. He says, hook it up, switch it to bypass, true bypass, and switch it to buffered bypass. And you'll hear the difference depending on how much cable you have. It's like nearly always a good buffered bypass is better than true bypass. So I like that about it. What else? And there's one super controversial part of the innards is the gooping. He was one of those goopers, which, to explain gooping, is you encase the entire circuit board and everything in epoxy, like black epoxy, so you can't read the values of the components. And we should talk about that for a moment, because that's something that adds to this whole pedal drama that I'm really fascinated with. So what are your thoughts on taking a pedal and encasing the components in epoxy so that you can't read the components and figure out the circuit?
Well, I think like you and I have talked about before, a lot of these circuits are based on other circuits. So to me, it's kind of like bullshit. It's like, you started with a circuit, from a tube screamer essentially, and made some tweaks. And now it's your circuit, which I guess that's valid and cool. But I don't know. I'm a person that's into transparency in all levels. So, I mean, if I buy a pedal, I want to see what's in there, and I want to see, without it being all gooped up. And that's just kind of the way I fall on it. How do you feel about it? I think.
Well, I'm a person who forever, even before I built pedals, I was like someone who liked to take care of their own gear.
Yeah.
So if something goes bad, I want to be able to change it and whatnot. And it's that's the thing too. The circuit is beautiful in every other way. So it would be even greater to see that. The only thing that I can think of that the gooping of that pedal did was make it a little add to the hype machine that made it as legendary as it was. So it'd be interesting to see if it would have been as popular. If not, that was just one element that added to it. Yeah. My thinking, and I could be completely wrong, is that pedal probably, it would have had people would have loved it anyway. You know what I mean? Because it's like, it sounds the way it does. And, it would have, with your design and the way that you did it, it should have been pretty successful, but I don't think it would have been as successful. So I don't know. I think it's a shitty practice that, and the thing of it is, if you look at the circuit, because this thing was actually cloned in 2009, someone dug all of that shit off of there, scraped it all off, and reverse engineered it and made a schematic. And when you look at it, the DoD preamp overdrive 250 is a great part of its circuit. Is like one component. There's other completely unique things to that circuit, which is another cool thing about that circuit. Wow. But at its heart, there's a DOD 250 in there. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
what happens if DOD would have gooped their pedal? You know,
Right.
if you come up with that, I don't know. But I will say, while we're talking about the circuit, another thing that I found fascinating about that pedal is I think that the designer did really well in he worked with two engineers that were in no way associated with music. And I think that helped him come up with the unique parts of that circuit, because he's just bouncing purely electrical engineering ideas off these guys. And he's taking his musician working ideas and he's filtering through them. And they're not like, they haven't been looking at tube screamers and, you know, fuzz boxes and all this shit. So they're giving him stuff that's just pure like science.
Right.
And he's taking that and rolling in his pedal. And I kind of think that that may have helped make that, because like I said, that circuit it's not a tube screamer. It's not an overdrive preamp, but it does have elements that it shares with a bunch of classic pedals because it's a pedal, and they, you know, electricity and pedals, you know, they all share things. Like, you know, think about the Fender Champ, the first Champs that came from an RCA manual, you know, like a tube manual. Here's a circuit. And Leo Fender took that and he made these classic amps from that. So what if RCA would have been gooping their circuits? You know,
right?
We'd all be playing crates or something. I don't know. But
no, but I think that's an interesting thing you brought up about like just early manufacturing of pedals just by companies. None of them goop their circuits or anything else. And yeah, I think it's interesting to think about that became a thing within the boutique industry to protect their quote intellectual property. But the basis for their pedal was some other circuit that they started with, like the DOD or whatever it was.
To be fair, there are some 60s pedals that did that.
Did they?
And some of them may have even been just to encase everything to keep it from, you know.
Right. That's what I was. Yeah.
But some of them may have been because some of them were opaque black gook. I think some of the early fuzz pedals, some Japanese effects too. I think I've seen some before. And there is a way to, you know, a lot of, especially pedals that have large components, to kind of keep them from rattling around. But there's things you can use that don't, you know, obscure the details. Another thing that's interesting, I mentioned that it got cloned in 2009 when they peeled all the gook back. There was still one area where everyone wasn't sure, because there was like the diodes, the clipping diode.
Uh-huh.
The diodes in there, they couldn't read what they were. So that became this whole level of like mythology surrounding what are these diodes? And so people were just like, they would try a bunch of them.
Oh, right.
And, you know, this one sounds close, but they didn't know. So that just added to the old hype. It's like, you can't have one because you don't know what the diodes are. So you got to get the real one. And there's so many little things that just rolled out, you know, in areas with this pedal that added to the hype to make it what it was. And even his affordable, the KTR, it's really funny because he has something written on the enclosure that a lot of people are offended by. But it's where, I forget the exact quote, but it's something that basically says, don't blame me for the hype associated with the KLON. You know, I'm not responsible, but you very much responsible. It's like the best troll ever. It's like, well, yeah, you are. Even this, everything is, you know, but I don't know. It's great because one of the reasons I like these pedal drum is I've found a couple threads where the designer is in there talking to people, and he seems like a cool guy, but there is a little bit of that, golly gee, I didn't know that this was going to happen. It's like, you did, and it was brilliant kind of the way that you did it.
Yeah.
But no, it's I just find this stuff fascinating. It's like, you know, the holy grail that everybody keeps looking for. And it's like, and it's not a thing, you know, it's the way you play, you know. I mean, there's a million ways to get there. I mean, how many great records were made without the KLON?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. How many great records were made without the Dumble amp?
Yeah.
A bunch of them, you know, but, you know, then again, here I am. I've never played a Dumble. I've never played a KLON. So, you know, some of me, I don't want to speak to like that. It does have this magical, you know, little thing to it, because it probably does. I mean, it has something going on.
Yeah.
You know, but I'm way more into just the mythology behind this and how it got to where it was, because it's fucking fascinating.
Yeah, I think that is interesting too. I mean, one of the side effects that kind of frosts me just as a person that doesn't have a ton of money to spend on gear is like how out of reach some pieces of gear become through this lore or just becoming popular, like you and I were turned on to Music Master bass amps for, when in the beginning stages of that kind of little phase. And even that little fad became a thing where now, like, you and I probably bought ours for $200, or you got yours as a trade, but when I was buying mine, they were really cheap.
Yeah.
Now they're getting kind of expensive, but I guess that's just the nature of things once the genie's out of the bottle. But some of these things like the KLON just become so ridiculous. I think it's ridiculous. Like to spend, I mean, I say that, but if you have the money to buy it, that's great. But like some working musician out there but I don't know. Just the fact that these things become out of reach, like guitars, especially too, like, no working musician's ever going to be able to own a burst. Never. I mean,
and I've made peace with that fact, and that's how I feel in the KLON too. It's like, yeah, I'll find something else, to get there and just appreciate. I mean, I appreciate a burst. I really appreciate it. I can look at the pictures of them and read about them. I love their stories and all that stuff. But it's like, I don't lose any sleep, complaining that I'll never have one, because it's just what it is. So it's just Joe Bonamassa who will have them. So,
well, I guess that's the way I think about it. Is they become something other than a musical instrument.
Right.
They just
become that's probably
that is kind of soulless to me, and I don't know. But you're right. I mean, it's not like it doesn't keep me up at night. It's just kind of one of those things that, as an old man shouting at clouds, it's just one of the things I shout about.
Well, one of the things about talking about the sound that everybody loves about the KLON, and one thing that always kind of makes me scratch my head a little is that people obsess over, I want my amp only louder. You know what I mean? I don't want to add any artifacts or anything like that. It's like, just listen to fucking records. I mean, they're using, for the guitar solo, they're using different guitars, different amps, different. I want something different. Exactly. When I do a solo, or if I want a part to stand out, I want something that's totally fucking different. And that's kind of the whole point of me choosing like a boost overdrive thing. That's a big part of it for me. And the other thing they obsess about, and this goes back to the whole true bypass thing, is I remember one day I was sitting around and I must have been bored because I had a loop pedal, just a pedal to switch things in and out of a loop. So I went, my pedal board, my big pedal board, it's got, I think, 8 pedals on it. And then I went straight into my amp. So I'm like, here's my guitar straight into my amp. I'm strumming it. And it's like, oh, that sounds good. It sounds like my amp. And then I step on the pedal, my pedal board. I pull my pedal board in, and it loses a little bit of high end and maybe a little bit of body. It's real close. I mean, just touching the volume knob a little bit, it kind of puts it right back to where it was. And people obsess about that. It's like, and I'm like, my point is, like, when I play live, the sound of my pedal board is what you're hearing. That's what I want my guitar to sound like. I don't care what my amp sounds like without the pedal board, because it's like I've just dialed my sound in, and that's what I want. Yeah. So if you remove that element from it, it's like, I don't care. It's like, I know in like recording, it's always garbage in, garbage out. You want to really get it right when you record it. And I guess an amp could kind of be like that, but it's like, I don't care what's going in. I care what's coming out. Yeah. And what's coming out is, if I'm getting what I want, I don't care if I'm losing anything because of this. And and if those 8 pedals were true bypass pedals, I'd be losing a lot. I mean, it would be way more dramatic with, 2 chords and all the, the chords between the pedals, and 8 true bypass pedals. Yeah. So no, there's different ways to think about it. I mean, I love overdrives, but I don't have that much experience with them because I'm satisfied, but I like reading about them. I like looking at, I don't think I've ever owned a boutique pedal, but I love the boutique industry. I mean, I just love everything about it. I love the stories behind the companies. Yeah. I love the designs of the pedals, everything about it. I mean, I think it's a huge, it's a really cool, colorful thing that we have available to us as guitar players, but I'm not a boutique pedal guy. I mean, I don't, my whole thing, and this is like the old guy sitting on his porch yelling at things, all that shit just looks like it breaks. I mean, I'm not singling out any, boutique companies, just that where we are with where electrical components are at. Yeah. I mean, the first thing I do when I see a pedal that I want to talk about or think, or familiarize myself with, is I look for a gut shot, a picture of the innards and how the pedal was put together. And that's where I saw the picture of the KLON, which is beautiful, I think. And then I saw a picture of the KTR, which is the affordable version of it, quotation marks. And it just, I'm like, that pedal looks cheap. I'm sorry. I know that it's probably very high quality for the era that we're in, but to me, it looks cheap. Yeah. And the person that the designer of the KLON said one of the things that he wanted like an easy way to change the switch. And it's there. There's a ribbon cable with a little snap clip where you can just pop out and put a new switch in. It's like, why do we have to have why don't we just get a good fucking switch? That's where we're at. And that's another reason why I'm so anti-true bypass is that's where this whole switch thing came from. Whoever started this like true bypass thing, there's these switches that, you need to do true bypass, a special type of switch. And that's when that little blue switch came into play that always breaks, that just, and go back to the Carling switches that you use that are still working in all my 70s pedals, Yeah. It's like, instead of designing a pedal that makes it easy to replace something that fails, is try to find something that doesn't fail or has a longer time between failing and not failing. Yeah. Like 20 to 40 years, like on some of these old Carling switches. Yeah. So that was a little rant we got in there.
I like it. Well,
let's talk about the Dumble.
I was going to say, I was just going to bring up the Dumble. I think I have played through a Dumble down at ECG maybe once.
I saw a couple down there. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, I guess for you, I guess you and I are not the target audience for a lot of this kind of gear, but.
Well, that's what's interesting, because I think a lot of people who are the target audience aren't really the target audience. It's like, think about that amp. Think about when that amp was made. And again, I've never heard this amp. I'm sure it's brilliant. I'm sure it's fabulous. It's like anybody that's played through it, you watch them, they're like, this is from another world. It's whatever. But everything that I like about an amplifier is not in that amp. I mean, it was designed at a time when you wanted the amp to do 1,000 things. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's got switches and knobs and all this stuff, and XLR outs, and depending on the model and all this shit. And it's like, I want something with, maybe either a single tone control, or maybe just bass, mid, and treble, or something like that. And a volume. That's all I want in a tube amp. Anything else, you're getting in the way of the tubes. And that whole idea, which still won't die, I guess, is that versatility in an amp. I want an amp that sounds like 5,000 different, amps. Right. It's like, I don't want that. I want an amp that sounds good.
Yeah.
I'll do the rest. Just give me something that sounds good. And that amp it's from an era when amps were trying to do different things. Now, I mean, we've had this whole period where it's like, let's get a classic tone and base an amp around a classic tone. I think a lot of guitar players now, they just want an amp that's based on a good sound. I think maybe I'm mistaken, but.
Well, how do you think the lore of the Dumble came about? Like, that's another, I remember when my first entree into that was Stevie Ray Vaughan, because I was a big Stevie Ray Vaughan fan, and I noticed that he had a Dumble on stage and blah, 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 and she was talking about it. And then sure enough, other big players were playing Dumbles, and it kind of became a thing. But I don't know. I wonder how much of that stuff is really the quality of the product, and as opposed to somehow just hitting lightning in a bottle at a certain point in time.
The rarity of it. I mean, there was only so many of them made. And the thing that's interesting about the Dumble is the Dumble came about by Howard Dumble, I think his name is, being in a club and seeing it. It was one of the maybe it was Robin Ford, some jazzy guy. They saw him playing through a basement and a tube screamer, and he said, I want to make that sound. So it came out of that sound. And it's like, well, you could probably use a basement and a tube screamer and get a pretty good sound too. Right. So no, it's the rareness of them. There's only so many of them made. Yeah. They were made for. They're all different because they were made for specific players in mind, and that's really cool. I think that's really cool. But at the same time, let me ask you, which song of Stevie Ray Vaughan sounds better because was played in a Dumble?
That's a great question, and I couldn't tell you.
It doesn't matter. I mean, it's just like you can make it work with what you have. And, Stevie Ray Vaughan had it going on. So, I mean, but that's not to say, and we should talk about this too. There's a difference between going on YouTube and listening to sounds, or the audience can't hear a different and stuff. The response of these these things is completely different. I mean, Stevie Ray Vaughan, you know, you can listen to his records and say, this sound is my favorite song. It's like a whatever he was playing, Vibrolux or whatever he was playing. That's that sound. So that, but when he was plugged into that, as opposed to him plugged into a Dumble, is a completely different story. You know what I mean? He may have been feeling it. So yeah, talking about this A being like a cheap pedal in a KLON is kind of worthless. I mean, it's interesting, but until you're plugged into it, you really, I mean, that's something that's totally different. Its response is everything to me. I mean, it's the way you feel when you're connected to it. I mean, so it is hard you can't A/B that with sound clips. I mean, it's
and I think that's a good point. I was going to bring that up before you did, or we're on the same page, is that, again, like all of this stuff is just like, exactly. It's like, to me, it doesn't matter what the audience member thinks or anything else. But if I, the player, am inspired and jazzed about these pieces of gear that I've collected and I'm getting the sounds I want to get, and it's going to inspire my playing, and it's going to have a positive impact on me as a player. So, but I'm like you too. And I think it's just funny. I think the whole guitar and musical instrument world is just full of lore and full of, I mean, you and I have our own, you know, lore about certain pieces of gear, or not necessarily lore maybe, but just I've romanticized certain pieces of gear, I think, because of, you know, our age and the kind of gear that was available when we were coming of age, you know, and what we were exposed to and what we played. So I think that plays into it too, is you know, these pieces of gear like the KLON or the Dumble also might be, you know, signposts to other people when they were coming up and playing, and so that's meaningful for them. And also, like you say, the rarity of these things, which, you know, is kind of another psychology unto itself, which is just kind of this collector's mentality of like, well, there were only 200 made, like the bursts, like there were so few of those made. And when they first came out, they couldn't give them away because nobody wanted them. But then all of a sudden they became a thing. And yeah, it is kind of fascinating how that works.
But yeah, it's interesting because nobody wanted them. They became a thing, but they became a thing because they were great fucking guitars.
Well, sure. Yeah.
People who knew. But so it's like, not like they made this dog that nobody wanted, and then suddenly somebody played it. Now everybody wants this dog. And another thing that should be pointed out with these two examples of gear that's been super, super hyped is take the amps. The boutique industry, there's a lot in the boutique industry of somebody just going, you know, I'm going to make a Bassman, or I'm going to make a Marshall, or I'm going to make this. And they do it and they use good components, something else. You know, Dumble and Flanagan, is that his name? The guy that did the KLON. I think, sorry if I get his name wrong, but they brought something to the table. You know what I mean? They like, sure, there's elements of a Fender and Dumble. You're going to find the OD250 DOD in the KLON, but it's not, you know, it's not the same thing.
Yeah, and reading about the inception of the KLON, I was kind of impressed by that guy's desire to really create something that was unique and that did come closer than other people have tried to, in terms of replicating that, the harmonic richness of a cranked amp through a pedal, you know, because lots of people have tried, and there are lots of great pedals still like that are tried and true that, you know, are great. But I kind of respect people who their intent is pure, or not pure, but, you know, as pure as it can be in terms of, this is what I want to do, and I'm going to really try to do this. And like you're saying, put my own spin on it and create something rather than just cloning something else. But that's another thing. I like what you touched on too, is I do think it's cool that people, well, it's kind of catch-22, but some people are trying to build things that maybe are more reliable than some old pieces of gear. Like, I mean, people have referenced Gretsch guitars as like, one of the things they say about old Gretches is that every one is a prototype because they were all manufactured so differently. And then also like I always hear about the Echoplexes, like, you know, nobody wants to take an Echoplex on the road because of that, it'll break down. And so maybe there are newer versions of that, or you know, digital versions that might come close. But so I think I like people when they have intent. But like you're saying, nowadays it's hard to get components that are the same quality as the components people used in the old days, in terms that were just run of the mill, you know, kind of military grade components that you could make stuff out of. So
yeah, they lasted forever. That's why there's still like so many, like, you know, fine amps from the 60s and 50s, and the capacitors, the filter caps are still working. I mean, they haven't totally died. And now, I mean, but, I'm basing a lot of my distrust of modern components from, my brief stint of like hobby pedal building and hobby amp building. And I just had poor experience with parts. But you know what? I didn't really look. I mean, you could probably source, really high spec parts. And if they do that, that's great. But
yeah,
I mean, I put more trust in older stuff for some reason, because it's partly because of that, what we stated, the components were, underrated and they last a lot longer just that I've had bad experience the other way. So it's like, it's not a scientific study at all. It's just in my experience.
It's crazy. Well, cool. Well, thanks again for listening. Again, as always, Chris and I appreciate it. Listen to us wherever you listen to your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever, Stitcher. Look for us on social media, Facebook, Instagram. We're on there. Chris and Rick Talk Guitars. Chris, any parting thoughts?
Thank you for listening, and play some guitar.
Do it. All right. Until next time.